In the heart of New York City, beneath the glittering chandeliers of a hotel where the wealthy gather, stood a little girl no one noticed. She was just 8 years old, blind, and clutching a folded letter to her chest. To the rushing guests, she looked small and out of place, yet she carried a truth powerful enough to shatter empires. That letter wasn't just ink on paper. It was a hidden history, buried for decades, now waiting to explode in the hands of a child. And when the richest woman in the room arrived, everything changed. What secret could force a millionaire to tremble before a blind girl? And why was this moment the one Evelyn Carter had prepared for her granddaughter all along? Because sometimes the smallest voices bring down the mightiest walls. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? The Whitmore Grand Hotel in New York was a palace of marble and gold, built to impress and intimidate. Guests who entered its towering doors carried themselves with pride, their designer clothes and expensive jewelry flashing under the glow of crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of place where power was not just seen but felt, where wealth spoke louder than words. And on that morning, amid the polished floors and echoing voices, stood someone who did not belong. Her name was Amira Lewis, just 8 years old. She was small for her age, her thin frame wrapped in a plain, hand-me-down dress. But what made her stand out most was not her size or her clothes. It was the way she stood perfectly still, her unseeing eyes softly focused on nothing at all. Amira was blind, and while the world around her moved in glitter and noise, she waited quietly, clutching a letter that seemed far too heavy for a child to hold. Amira's life had never been easy. She was raised not by her parents, but by her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, a woman whose hands were rough from decades of work, yet whose voice carried warmth and strength. Evelyn had been everything to her: caretaker, teacher, protector. And though Amira's blindness had drawn stares, whispers, and pity, Evelyn had never let her believe she was less than anyone else. To her grandmother, Amira was a gift, proof that courage did not come from what you could see, but from what you carried inside. Their modest apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from the grandeur of the Whitmore Grand. There, the streets were filled with the sound of children playing, the smell of fried food from corner shops, and the constant hum of traffic. It was a neighborhood where families leaned on each other to survive, where Evelyn's neighbors often came by for advice or a warm meal when times were tough. And though money was scarce, love was abundant. But Evelyn also carried a secret, one that had weighed heavily on her for decades. She had seen injustice in many forms, but there was one night 30 years ago that she could never forget. She knew the day would come when that truth had to be told, not for herself but for justice. And before her passing, she prepared Amira for it. The child might not have understood all the details, but she understood enough. The letter she now held was not just paper. It was a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and a hidden debt that the world had ignored for too long. Amira had learned to navigate life by sound, scent, and touch. She could recognize people by the rhythm of their footsteps, the cadence of their voices, even the fragrance that lingered when they passed by. Evelyn had trained her well, teaching her to pay attention to the details others overlooked. And it was those skills that gave Amira confidence to stand alone in a place where no one expected her. As the morning crowd filled the hotel lobby, no one noticed the child waiting near the center. Wealthy businessmen spoke hurriedly into their phones. Elegant women clutched handbags worth more than their entire paychecks. Hotel staff moved quickly to please demanding guests. Amira was invisible to them, just another child they assumed must be lost or waiting for someone richer, more important. But Amira wasn't lost. She knew exactly who she was waiting for. The name Evelyn Carter had whispered to her again and again was Clara Whitmore. To most of the world, Clara was a symbol of success. The owner of the largest luxury hotel chain on the East Coast, a woman who had built her empire from the ground up. She was praised in magazines, invited to charity galas, and admired for her business brilliance. But to Evelyn, Clara Whitmore represented something else. A debt unpaid, a truth buried, and a betrayal that could not remain hidden forever. Amira had never met Clara before. She couldn't picture the sharp suits or the perfectly styled hair described in newspapers. But she knew one thing. Clara carried a signature lavender perfume, imported from Europe, and a voice that betrayed her when caught off guard, deep, steady, but trembling in moments of weakness. Evelyn had repeated those details until Amira could recall them in her sleep. She would know Clara not by sight, but by sound and scent. That morning, as the polished black limousine pulled up outside the hotel, Amira's small hands tightened around the letter. She felt the weight of her grandmother's trust pressing on her chest. Around her, the world bustled with noise, but in her mind, everything was silent except for one truth. This was the moment she had been prepared for. She was just a child, blind and alone in a place that looked down on people like her. Yet she was about to confront one of the most powerful women in the city. What could an 8-year-old possibly reveal that could bring a millionaire to her knees? That question lingered in the air, unseen but heavy, as the doors to the limousine opened and Clara Whitmore stepped into the lobby. The doors of the Whitmore Grand swung open, and Clara Whitmore stepped inside. Her presence shifted the air in the lobby. Guests turned their heads, hotel staff straightened their posture, and the hum of chatter softened as if wealth itself had just entered the room. Clara was the kind of woman who carried power like a weapon. Tailored navy blue suit, diamond pin at her collar, and a sharp gaze that dared anyone to waste her time. To most, she was untouchable. But to Amira Lewis, she was exactly who she had been waiting for. Amira tilted her head slightly. The faint trace of lavender perfume drifted toward her, delicate but distinct. Then came the sound of Clara's voice, speaking briefly to the receptionist. Deep, commanding, and steady. It was the voice Evelyn Carter had described so many times. Amira's heart pounded. This was her moment. She stepped forward, clutching the folded letter, and softly spoke Clara's name. For the first time that morning, Clara turned her attention away from money, power, and business deals, and toward a child standing in the center of her empire. At first, Clara looked puzzled. Who was this little girl? Why was she calling her by name? But as Amira introduced herself, mentioning Evelyn Carter, something in Clara's perfectly composed face cracked. Her eyes widened, her hand twitched, and a sharp breath escaped her lips. Evelyn. That was a name Clara had buried deep in the past, a name she had spent 30 years trying to erase. And now it was spoken aloud by a blind child in the middle of her own hotel. Amira extended the letter. Clara hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for it. Inside that envelope lay the memory of a night she had never forgotten. The night when, at 15, she believed she had taken a man's life. The memory flooded back in waves. The office building, the senior partner who cornered her, the shove, the sickening sound of his head striking the desk. She had thought her future ended that night. But Evelyn Carter had appeared, like a guardian in the shadows. Evelyn rearranged the scene, called for help, and told the police it was an accident. She never revealed Clara's part in it. Evelyn had given Clara freedom, and Clara had taken that freedom and built an empire on greed, cruelty, and exploitation. Now Evelyn's granddaughter was standing before her, holding the proof of that buried truth. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Around her, the wealthy guests carried on, unaware of the storm forming in their midst. But Amira's next move changed everything. Slowly, she revealed a small voice recorder hidden in her hand. Its red light blinked faintly. Every word Clara had spoken, every hesitation, every breath, it was all preserved. Clara froze. For the first time in decades, the woman who owned skyscrapers and commanded boardrooms felt cornered by a child. Her empire was not built to withstand innocence. It was built to crush those without power. But this child was not powerless. Amira spoke steadily, her small voice carrying more weight than the lobby's polished grandeur. She explained that she was not here alone. Evelyn's old friend, Dr. Samuel Price, a seasoned civil rights lawyer, had been guiding her. For years, Price had investigated Clara's empire, digging through contracts, court filings, and financial records. He had uncovered a trail of destruction. Neighborhoods gutted, families evicted, workers silenced. Clara had displaced nearly 300 families for a single real estate deal, pocketing a $9 million bonus while children slept on sidewalks. As Amira spoke, Clara's polished confidence began to falter. The trembling hand that held the letter, the sharp eyes now darting nervously around the lobby, signs of a woman losing control. She turned slightly, as if to retreat toward the elevators, but Amira's words stopped her cold. The little girl had called the press, and right on cue the revolving doors burst open. Journalists poured in, cameras flashing, microphones raised, voices firing questions that echoed off the marble walls. Guests gasped, hotel staff froze, and suddenly the quiet lobby was a stage. Clara Whitmore, the untouchable business tycoon, was trapped in the center of it all. Amira placed the letter and the recorder on the marble counter for everyone to see. Then, through the crowd, Dr. Price appeared, calm, steady, carrying a thick folder of evidence. He was not here for spectacle. He was here for justice. The tension in the lobby spiked. Reporters shouted, "Is it true you evicted hundreds of families? Who was Evelyn Carter to you? Did you cover up your past?" Clara's face paled, her lips parted, but no words came. The walls she had built around her life were crumbling, and there was no way out. Dr. Price opened the folder and began to read. Contracts with Clara's signature. Financial statements showing millions siphoned into hidden accounts. Testimonies from workers she had underpaid. And finally, Evelyn's own words, written in her final days, describing the night she had saved Clara. The weight of truth was crushing, undeniable. Clara's knees weakened. For a moment it seemed she might collapse. But still she tried to move, pushing toward the crowd, desperate to escape the questions. Yet everywhere she turned, phones were recording, cameras flashing, guests whispering. The empire she had built on silence was being dismantled in front of the world. And there stood Amira, blind yet unshaken, holding nothing more than her grandmother's letter and her own quiet courage. She had no wealth, no power, no status. Yet she held the one thing Clara could not buy, the truth. The rising tension in the lobby felt unbearable. Guests watched in silence, journalists pressed forward, and Clara's empire teetered on the edge. What would she do now? Confess and face the consequences, or deny and risk the avalanche of evidence about to bury her completely? The answer would come in the next moment, the moment that would decide not just Clara's fate, but whether Evelyn Carter's sacrifice would finally be honored after 30 long years. The lobby of the Whitmore Grand was no longer a sanctuary of wealth and power. It had transformed into a courtroom without walls. Cameras flashed like lightning, questions rained down like fire, and in the eye of the storm stood Clara Whitmore, the empire she built collapsing around her in real time. For decades, she had silenced critics, buried scandals, and bought her way out of trouble. But she had never faced this. A blind child holding the truth, a lawyer armed with evidence, and a crowd unwilling to look away. Dr. Samuel Price's voice was steady but merciless as he continued to unveil document after document. Every page stripped Clara of another layer of power. There was the contract proving she had pushed 289 families from their homes, the ledger showing a $9 million performance bonus, wired to her account the very same week, and sworn testimonies from displaced tenants who had begged for mercy but were met with locked doors and eviction notices. The room grew heavier with each revelation. Guests who once admired Clara now whispered in disbelief. Some lifted their phones higher, capturing every word. Others shook their heads, muttering about the cruelty now laid bare. Even the hotel staff, her own employees, stood frozen, unsure whether to shield their employer or bear witness to her fall. Clara's chest tightened as if the marble walls themselves were closing in. She reached for composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. She tried to speak, to deny, but her voice cracked under the weight of truth. The polished billionaire, once feared in boardrooms, now looked like a cornered figure stripped of all armor. And then came the final blow, Evelyn Carter's letter. Dr. Price read it aloud, each word echoing through the grand lobby. In it, Evelyn described the night she had saved Clara as a teenager. She had detailed how she rearranged the scene, how she had lied to the police to protect a frightened young girl, and she had written her final wish, that Clara, once safe, would rise to protect others instead of exploiting them. Evelyn's words were not angry. They were filled with hope, hope that had been betrayed. The letter was a mirror that Clara could not avoid. In it, she saw her own hypocrisy laid bare. The woman who had been rescued had gone on to destroy others. And now, the granddaughter of the woman who saved her was here to collect the debt of truth. Clara's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The cameras captured every flicker of weakness, every tremor in her face. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be powerless. She had built her life on control, yet here she was, stripped of it by an 8-year-old child who could not even see her. Amira stood motionless, her unseeing eyes softly directed forward, her small frame steady against the storm. She had no malice in her expression, no triumph. She was simply the vessel of her grandmother's truth. And that truth carried more power than all of Clara's millions. The reporters pressed harder, their voices overlapping in chaos. Do you admit the evictions were intentional? Will you step down from your empire? What do you say to Evelyn Carter's granddaughter standing here today? Clara tried to move toward the elevator, but the crowd tightened around her. The air filled with the sound of shutters snapping, pens scribbling, and microphones pushing forward. Every exit was blocked. Every escape is closed. She had nowhere left to run. Dr. Price raised his hand, silencing the room with his calm authority. He looked directly at Clara, then at the journalists. His words carried the weight of decades fighting for justice. The truth you tried to bury has been carried here by a child who cannot see the world, yet sees it clearer than you ever have. You cannot run from this. Not anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. The world that once adored her now stood as witness to her disgrace. Every whisper in the crowd felt like a hammer striking her chest. And then, Amira's voice cut through the silence. Soft, steady, unwavering. She gave Clara a choice. Confess now before the world, and face the consequences with some dignity. Or wait until tomorrow, when every newspaper, every screen, every voice would carry the evidence of her cruelty. Clara's lips trembled. The cameras zoomed in, the microphones edged closer. The woman who had once seemed larger than life now looked impossibly small, diminished under the gaze of truth. For the first time, she realized what Evelyn had truly done for her. Saved her life, not so she could exploit, but so she could protect. And she had failed. Her silence screamed louder than any denial. Her eyes darted across the crowd, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The journalists shouted again, their voices colliding into a wall of sound. Guests leaned closer, hungry for the fall of a queen. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances. And in the center of it all, Amira remained calm, holding her grandmother's letter close, knowing that this was the moment Evelyn had prepared her for. The mighty Clara Whitmore was cornered. The truth was undeniable. The empire she had built was collapsing brick by brick, in front of the flashing cameras and watching eyes. And then came the words from Dr. Price that sealed her fate forever. Justice delayed is still justice delivered. And today, justice has arrived. The crowd erupted, questions fired faster than ever. and Clara's world shattered completely. But this was only the beginning of the end. The real consequences, what would be stripped away, what would be rebuilt, were still to come. 2 months later, the Whitmore name no longer glistened across the skyline. The empire that once symbolized luxury had been dismantled piece by piece. Clara Whitmore, once hailed as an untouchable mogul, was forced to sell her chain of hotels. The millions she hoarded were redirected into a massive compensation fund for the very families she had displaced. For the first time in decades, she had no podium to stand on, no stage to command, no power to shield her from consequences. Her life had come full circle in a way both cruel and fitting. The woman who once ruled marble lobbies now scrubbed floors in a modest suburban hotel, dressed in the same uniform her mother once wore. Gone were the designer suits, the limousines, the grand receptions. In their place was silence, humility, and the haunting memory of a little girl's voice that brought her empire to its knees. But the story did not end in Clara's downfall. It grew into something far more enduring. With the support of Dr. Samuel Price and the redirected funds, Amira Lewis became the face of a new beginning. Together, they established the Evelyn Carter Learning Center in Brooklyn, a place where children from struggling neighborhoods could find what so many had been denied: safety, education, and hope. The center was not just a building. It was a living tribute to Evelyn's sacrifice, a beacon for those society often overlooked. Its walls carried Evelyn's picture, her eyes steady, her words etched below in bold letters: "Protect those who cannot protect themselves." Every child who walked through its doors felt that promise. Free tutoring filled the evenings, hot meals warmed hungry stomachs, and mentors gave children the tools to dream bigger than their circumstances. Amira, though still only 8 years old, became the quiet soul of the center. Her blindness never defined her, her courage did. She could not see the bright murals painted across the walls, but she could hear the laughter of children who no longer feared eviction. She could feel the hugs of parents who whispered thank yous with tears in their eyes. She could sense the ripple her grandmother's legacy had created, a ripple that would spread for generations. The contrast was striking. While Clara faded into obscurity, Evelyn's name grew louder, stronger, carried not by wealth or power, but by truth and compassion. One woman had spent her life building walls of marble to keep others out. Another had left behind words and actions that opened doors for the forgotten. And in the end, it was Evelyn's voice, echoing through her granddaughter, that prevailed. Yet, as powerful as this story is, it is not just about one girl, one grandmother, or one fallen tycoon. It is about the world we live in, a world where injustice often hides behind luxury, where those with power can erase entire communities with the stroke of a pen. It is about how racism, greed, and exploitation intersect, leaving families displaced, workers silenced, and children forced to grow up in shadows. But it is also about something else, the unshakable truth that even the smallest voices matter. That justice, no matter how long delayed, finds its way back. That the courage of a child, armed with nothing but love and determination, can do what courts, governments, and millions of dollars could not. Amira's story reminds us that history is written not only by the powerful but also by those who refuse to be silent. And it asks each of us a difficult question. When injustice stands tall in front of us, will we walk past quietly like the guests in that hotel lobby, or will we stop, listen, and act like Amira? Because the truth is this: empires fall, but legacies live on. Clara Whitmore's name became a cautionary tale, while Evelyn Carter's became a banner of hope. And it all began with a letter, a child's voice, and the courage to confront a system built to ignore her. So as you sit with this story, ask yourself, whose voice are you listening to? And whose truth will you carry forward? Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet steps of a blind child walking into a lobby of marble and glass, refusing to be unseen. You've just witnessed how one blind child's courage exposed decades of injustice and brought down an empire built on greed. But what do you think? Was Clara's downfall enough? Or should justice have gone even further? Do you believe Evelyn Carter's sacrifice finally received the recognition it deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.